They were never supposed to find it. That's what the archivist whispered just before his name disappeared from all state payroll records. In the autumn of 1848, buried beneath centuries of wood, blood, and stone, workers demolishing the old St. Mary's Academy in Salem cracked through the chapel floor and uncovered what Massachusetts tried to bury forever, a lead line box. Still warm to the touch, inside were 47 journals, leather-bound, small, trembling with age. Everyone belonged to a girl. Every page was a cry for help. But it wasn't the suffering that terrified the investigators. It was the names, scrawled in perfect, educated cursive, mayors, judges, bishops, governors, entire bloodlines of New England's elite, documented not just as donors, but as clients. Within days, the state intervened. The journals were sealed. The demolition halted. Officially, nothing was found. And yet those who did read the contents, many went mad. Others vanished. One man, decades later, confessed on his deathbed, "We let them hurt those girls because it was easier than telling the world who paid for it." The Fairfax name was never mentioned publicly, but in the black archives beneath Beacon Hill, in records not indexed, never digitized, and marked for destruction every 10 years, the Fairfax legacy survives. And it is far more than an elite New England family. It is a system. It began as reform, charity, moral education for orphan girls, but it metastasized into something unholy, a mechanism of silence, abuse, and spiritual corrosion, a grooming ground for men drunk on untouchable power and women who weaponize virtue to hide monstrosity. Tonight, I'll tell you what was never supposed to be said aloud, not just what the Fairfax family did, but why they did it, and how their influence infects institutions to this day. Under new names, new uniforms, same intentions. But this isn't just a story about the past. It's a warning, because the techniques of domination they pioneered, isolation, moral inversion, institutional sanctity, are still in use. And once you see the pattern, you'll never unsee it again. So if you're still here, still watching, understand this. After this story, you won't sleep the same again. Now lean in, because the walls have ears, the elite have secrets, and the Fairfax family, they made sure both would never forget. By the time Victoria Fairfax arrived in Salem in 1811, she was already a master of masks. To the public, she was the widowed daughter of Southern aristocracy, cultured, composed, and draped in layers of Christian virtue. But to those who studied her carefully, there was something else, something colder than grief, a strategic hunger behind the stillness. Salem saw grace. What they missed was control. She arrived with money, old money, and a vision so perfectly tailored to the town's anxieties that it disarmed even the most skeptical clergy. A sanctuary for girls, free education for the poor, refinement for the respectable. But under the veneer of charity, something ancient stirred. She purchased the old Hartwell mansion on Beacon Hill. Locals avoided it. 3 families had tried to live there, each fled in under a year. Whispers of shadows that moved, voices behind walls, children waking up screaming with no memory of dreams. Victoria didn't flinch. She bought it outright, and within months, the renovations began. A chapel was added, complete with stained glass depictions of female saints, martyred, bloodied, eyes upturned in silent obedience. A wing of dormitories, meditation rooms, but most disturbingly, a private third-floor corridor, sealed off. No windows, soundproofed. She called it a place of spiritual correction. Joining her was her sister, Evangeline, fragile, devout, pale, a woman who never smiled with her eyes, and Bartholomew Fairfax, the preacher, tall, gaunt, with a voice like cracking ice. His sermons were fear incarnate. Hellfire roared behind soft-spoken words. He told parents their daughters were lambs in a world of wolves, but he never warned them the wolves were already inside. On September 15, 1811, the academy opened its doors. 23 girls entered, orphans, daughters of drunkards, girls with no protectors, no status, no one to ask too many questions. Each one smiled on day 1. By week 2, the smiles began to fade. It started slowly, with mandatory silence after sunset. Then the rules multiplied. No letters without approval. No leaving the premises under any condition. Missteps were corrected with isolation. Not in their rooms, but in the third-floor corridor. Girls came back different. Quiet, pale, shaking. Victoria called it spiritual refinement. But refinement doesn't leave bruises, and obedience should never taste like fear. The academy became a factory of facades, and Victoria, she wasn't running a school. She was running a machine, one designed to break girls into something else entirely. Margaret Sullivan was the first to understand the truth, but she couldn't speak it. She had arrived at St. Mary's with the same fire that kept her alive in the mills of Salem: red hair, sharp tongue, and a mind that soaked up knowledge like rain on dry stone. For the first time in her life, she had a bed of her own, food that wasn't spoiled, books, music, structure. She wrote to her cousin the first week, "It feels like God has found me." By the third month, her letters stopped. What happened to Margaret was not a single event. It was erosion, a slow, surgical unmaking of spirit. The girls were divided, the orphans placed in devotional routines. Mornings began with prayer, always led by Bartholomew Fairfax, but what he preached wasn't scripture, it was submission. Your thoughts are the enemy. Your will is the weapon of sin. Silence is holiness. At night, Margaret and the other charity students were brought to the meditation rooms. But they weren't alone. Men came, always after dark, always through the side door. Their faces were never seen, only their shoes and voices. Some laughed, others prayed. The girls were told this was penance, a gift, a chance to serve the cause of purity by absorbing the sin of others. Margaret resisted. She screamed once, and for that, she was locked in the chapel overnight. It was the winter of 1812 when the academy began to rot from the inside, but the outside never looked more pristine. Victoria Fairfax hosted teas for the town's elite. Ministers praised her in Sunday sermons. Legislators visited to observe moral instruction in action. They left with smiles, hand-pressed letters of gratitude, and sometimes a girl's ribbon tucked into their coat. Down the hill, seamstress Abigail Thornton watched from her small cottage. She wasn't a woman prone to fantasy, widow, church-going, worked with her hands and kept her thoughts to herself. But something about the academy gnawed at her. At first, it was subtle. The cloak she stitched were returned with seams torn at the shoulders, like they'd been pulled too hard. Undergarments stained in ways no hymn could justify. She told herself not to ask questions. Until one gray morning, she arrived early. She saw them, men, not priests, not staff, strangers, wealthy, coast to five for the cold, slipping out. The side entrance with heads down and collars up, that door led to the third floor. The meditation rooms. She didn't say a word, just watched, and returned the next week, and the next. And the girls, they were changing. Margaret Sullivan no longer smiled. Her hair hung in dull ropes, her skin pale as chalk. Priscilla Morse, who once begged for extra books, now stared blankly through frost-covered windows. The light inside her, gone. Others walked like they were underwater, slow, distant, some bruised, all silenced. Then came December 13th. Abigail woke to a cough, couldn't sleep, lit a lamp, boiled water, and from her window, she saw it, flickering. Torchlight in the chapel, not candlelight, erratic, violent, shadows moving, figures pacing. And then, the sound, muffled, human, screaming. She froze, pressed her hands against the glass. Her breath fogged the pain. Her bones refused to move. Then silence, and when dawn came, so did the lie. Hannah Whitmore, age 13, dead of a fever, they said. Buried the next day. No family, no guests, just staff and students, their hymns hollow, their eyes broken. Victoria wore black, not grief, authority, and when Abigail offered her condolences, Victoria smiled, cold, controlled, as if the death had been necessary or planned. And for the first time, Abigail knew the academy was not a school, it was a ritual, and the girls were offerings. Death became routine at St. Mary's. By February of 1813, 2 more girls were buried behind the academy: Priscilla Morse, the quiet reader, Mary Catherine O'Brien, bright-eyed, barely 15, both gone within a week. No public mourning, no family inquiries, just closed caskets, closed mouths, and a clergy that spoke only in abstractions. God's will, the trials of the flesh, sacrifices for the greater moral order. But Abigail Thornton had stopped believing in holy language. She noticed the pattern. Only the charity girls were dying, only the voiceless, the ones with no fathers left to fight, no mothers to question. Meanwhile, the daughters of Salem's respected families, the ones whose tuition kept the school afloat, remained strangely untouched. Paler, yes, subdued, but alive. She watched Margaret Sullivan walk past one afternoon, arms clutching, a worn book to her chest. Her fingers were trembling, her eyes, once bright, now flinched at sunlight, and something inside Abigail shifted. She decided to act. That night, she followed the carriages. They came late, as always. 6 of them, this time, sleek, black, unmarked. They wound up the side road in silence, wheels hissing against wet gravel. Abigail wrapped herself in a shawl, lit no lantern, and crept behind them on foot, keeping distance, heart hammering. From the brush, she watched as the men were greeted by Bartholomew Fairfax. He kissed their hands, a preacher bowing to patrons. One man handed him something heavy in a cloth bag. Coins, books, she couldn't tell. He nodded, then led them inside, through the side door, up toward the 3rd floor, and that's when she heard it. Not screams this time, not yet, but chanting, low, rhythmic, male voices, in Latin, or something close to it, a language older than Salem, older than the English crown, words meant to bind, to sanctify, to erase. She stayed until her teeth chattered from cold, until the lamps went out one by one. Then she fled, not just from the hill, but from the woman she had been, the seamstress, the observer, the good citizen. She began writing letters, anonymous, specific, detailing what she'd seen. She sent one to a former magistrate, another to a Boston newspaper, a third to the Catholic diocese. Only one ever responded. A single sentence, unsigned. Do not involve yourself further. The Fairfax family answers to no earthly court. The Fairfax family did not operate alone. Their power wasn't just wealth or social grace. It was institutional immunity, the kind of protection that doesn't come from influence, but design. A system so deeply embedded in law, clergy, and capital that it made Victoria Fairfax untouchable, because Salem was only one node across New England. The Fairfax name appeared quietly on the boards of orphanages, reform schools, religious charities, places where the vulnerable were gathered, groomed, and erased. And behind them, a network of men who wore robes, collars, and powdered wigs, all speaking different languages of authority, but all serving the same altar, control. In 1813, after the 3rd girl's death at St. Mary's, Abigail's letters sparked murmurs among a few minor officials. One young clerk in the Essex County Courthouse, Elijah Ward, began collecting discrepancies in academy death records. He noted the burial permits were signed not by the town coroner, but by Dr. Edmund Fairfax, Victoria's cousin, a man who also served as the academy's private physician, financial advisor, and legal executor. Elijah submitted a quiet petition to have the cemetery records reviewed by the county. It vanished within a week. He submitted a second, this time to a Boston oversight committee. 2 days later, Elijah Ward was found dead in his study. Official cause, self-inflicted wounds. But the cuts didn't match the angle of his dominant hand. His throat was slit left to right, but Elijah was left-handed. His death was ruled a suicide before noon. The Fairfax file he had compiled, gone. Abigail never heard from him. Instead, the Academy received a glowing write-up in the Massachusetts Educational Review, praising its moral vision and effective reduction of social burden through spiritual training. That phrase chilled her, reduction of social burden. The Fairfax family didn't see orphans. They saw assets, unclaimed bodies, blank slates, girls with no legal weight, disposable vessels for rituals that had less to do with religion and more with power transference, blood for favor, silence for access. And the church, it didn't just turn a blind eye, it officiated. The bishop who blessed St. Mary's opening was later revealed to have sat on the same charity board as Victoria. His sermons often cited her as a divinely appointed steward of feminine virtue. The girls died in silence because their predators wrote the silence into law. There was a room beneath the chapel. It wasn't on any blueprint, not in the town records, not in Fairfax's construction documents, but it existed, dug into the earth, stone by stone, long before Victoria ever arrived. It was Hannah Whitmore who first whispered about it, weeks before her death. Another girl, Ruth Ellery, would later testify, though her voice shook so violently she could barely finish her statement. She said Hannah had seen the black stairs. They were hidden beneath a false altar behind the pulpit in the chapel, a stone slab that pivoted silently when pressed at its base. No one was meant to find them, But Hannah had been cleaning, alone. When she saw Bartholomew descend, she followed. What she saw below the church floor never left her, and it was never spoken fully, but Ruth repeated the words Hannah had said. Again and again, in a whisper like broken glass, there were masks, there were candles. They were singing to something that wasn't God. The underground room was circular, stone walls, an iron ring bolted in the center of the floor. At the far end, a raised dais with a carved seat, blackened by time. Not wood, not stone, something older, something porous, like bone. Victoria called it the throne of judgment. According to Ruth, once a girl was sent below, she didn't return the same. Sometimes she didn't return at all. The official burial logs listed fever, consumption, brain sickness. But Ruth described nights when girls screamed in languages they didn't know, woke with cuts in perfect geometric lines. Some spoke to people who weren't there, names they had never heard before. Hannah Whitmore tried to escape. She begged Ruth to run with her, said she was going to the sheriff, said they couldn't ignore the basement, said they had to tell someone before it happened again. That night, December 13th, 1812, Hannah was locked in the chapel. They said she died of fever, but Ruth saw the blood on the altar. After Hannah's death, the other girls stopped speaking entirely, and when Ruth herself was chosen to clean the chapel a month later, she faked a fainting spell, was moved to the infirmary. Days later, she disappeared from the school entirely. A relative claimed her. She was the only one who survived. Years later, on her deathbed, Ruth Ellery wrote a single phrase in her Bible. Not a prayer, not a psalm, just this: the Fairfax family does not worship what you think they do. What did the Fairfax family believe? That's the question no historian dares to answer, because it wasn't Christianity. Not really, not even in the twisted, flagellant way some old sects practiced it. What the Fairfaxes built was older, quieter, rooted in the theology of power, not salvation, a religion with no heaven, no forgiveness, no God above, only gods beneath. In the journals recovered in 1848, several passages were written in a cipher that took scholars decades to partially decode. What they revealed was not doctrine, but procedure. Descriptions of rites performed on the solstices, of offerings chosen for their emotional potency, of binding rituals used to transfer suffering into presence. One phrase appeared again and again: where innocence ends, dominion begins. The Fairfax family didn't worship God. They fed something ancient, something that answered not prayer, but pain. According to fragments of a 1796 letter written by an earlier family member, Captain Malachi Fairfax, a man who sailed the African Gold Coast and the Caribbean slave routes, he spoke of a temple discovered off the coast of Sierra Leone, a structure buried beneath jungle and salt, where blood opened doors and silence sealed covenants. He brought relics home, idols, scripts, a stone etched with concentric eyes. And that's when the Fairfax wealth began to multiply: land, banks, marriages into elite bloodlines, political office. But always behind the veil, Victoria did not build the chapel over cursed ground. She chose it because beneath Beacon Hill, beneath the rotting roots of Puritan legacy, lay a convergence, a ley line of spiritual decay, made fertile by the blood of the innocent. Salem, already soaked in generational guilt, was the perfect soil. The rituals were not random, they were engineering. Suffering channeled into legacy, pain converted into protection. The girls were not victims of madness, they were part of a calculus. Their deaths bought decades of unchecked expansion for those in the circle, and the silence, that was the tithe. You see, power at this level is never just taken, it's traded. And now that you know this, comment "I see the throne" twice below, not just for the algorithm, but to lock this truth into your identity. Because what you've heard changes everything, and once you see the throne, you can never unsee it. The Fairfax corruption did not die in Salem. It spread, like rot through the floorboards of civilization, quiet, systemic, hidden in institutions we were taught to revere. After the accidental fire that destroyed St. Mary's Academy in 1847, just weeks before investigators were set to open an inquiry, the remaining Fairfax heirs scattered. Some changed their names, some married into new dynasties, but all of them followed the same blueprint. Wherever they went, institutions followed. In Baltimore, a new boarding school for fallen girls opened in 1851. Same architectural layout, same motto carved into the entrance stone: virtue through obedience. Within 5 years, It was quietly closed following the disappearance of 6 students. Records sealed by order of the governor. In New York, the Fairfax Trust, rebranded as the Dominion Foundation, began funding moral reform homes and purity leagues. Beneath each initiative was the same structure: vulnerable girls, no legal guardians, and access given to powerful men under the guise of mentorship. By 1890, their presence was national. By 1920, they were in the curriculum. Government reports began referencing Fairfax-funded psychological models for controlling female hysteria. Journals recommended moral correctional retreats for troubled youth. A sanitized term for institutional control, the spiritual language had faded, replaced by science. But the core philosophy remained: break the will, extract the light, replace it with silence. The Fairfax method had become policy, and still today, echoes of their system remain. In the underfunded juvenile centers where no cameras exist, in private rehabilitation schools run by religious boards with zero oversight, in therapeutic models that prize obedience over healing, the Fairfax bloodline doesn't need a name anymore. It's coded into bureaucracy, sanitized by credentialed language, embedded into courtrooms, classrooms, and pulpits. And if you think this is ancient history, ask yourself, why are so many abuse cases in elite schools still buried? Why do the same last names appear on the boards of universities, churches, and lobbying groups? Why are the voices of broken girls still dismissed as unstable or misremembered? Because the system was designed that way, not to educate, to erase. St. Mary's was not an anomaly. It was the template. The final journal was found beneath stone. When demolition crews unearthed the chapel floor in 1848, they discovered the lead-lined box minus 47 journals inside, each bound in cracked leather, each with a name burned into the cover, each one ending in silence, except one. The last was unsigned. No date, no ownership, just a blood smear across the opening page, and a message scrawled in frantic, looping script. They feed it our fear, and in return, it forgets them. This journal wasn't like the others, where the rest documented punishments, rituals, and whispered threats. This one testified. It detailed a single ritual, the one the others were afraid to name. The girls called it the offering of names. It took place only once per year, always in December, always beneath the chapel. According to the anonymous author, each orphan was assigned a number, not a name, a number, and on the appointed night, they were led down the black stairs, blindfolded, forced to kneel in a circle around the throne of judgment. One by one, they were made to speak aloud the name of a sin, not their sin, theirs. The men who had visited them, the faces they had been told to forget, the voices that pressed into them through locked doors. The sins the girls had been forced to carry, they spoke the names, and when it was done, Victoria would walk the circle and remove one girl. The rest were told she had been released, that she had gone on to higher service. But the journal claims otherwise. The chosen girl became the vessel. Her body was prepared, bathed in milk and ash, her hair shorn, her tongue anointed with oil. She was kept in total darkness for 3 days. On the 3rd night, the men returned. The ritual was not filmed, not photographed, but it left a mark on the stone, a ring of scorched earth and a scent that no one could describe without shivering. Then silence, and after, power. Victoria's academy flourished. Her donors were elected. Her enemies fell sick. Land deeds shifted. Judges ruled in her favor. What she offered below the chapel protected her above it. This was the Fairfax Covenant, and it didn't end in 1848. The same foundation that funded St. Mary's now backs lobbying groups in DCTHEI, or trust owns buildings on Ivy League campuses. Their law firm handles political damage control, and their blood still walks Capitol Hill. But you've heard the names now. You've read the ritual. You've seen the throne. And once you see it, you can't go back, because the Fairfax family never wanted fame. They wanted forever. If this truth lit something inside you, something dark and burning, share this video with one man who's ready to wake up. Comment, "The silence is broken." And remember, they built the system on obedience, but it only stands because we keep our heads down. Lift your eyes and burn the throne.